As bombs rain down on Tokyo, the Americans are slowly pulling closer to victory, and the deadliest conflict in history is almost at an end. But in these final missions, the war is not entirely heartless. As we are about to see, there was at least one crew member who had pity on the enemy, and right or wrong, tried to show them mercy from the bombsight of his B-29. It is 1945, and as the American Marines and naval forces have pushed the Japanese back in the Pacific, taking Guam and Iwo Jima, the next campaign is beginning in the effort to bring the Japanese Empire to their knees and put an end to the bloody war. This campaign would be the bombing of the Japanese mainland from the brand new B-29 superfortress. This cutting-edge bomber was leaps and bounds ahead of any other bomber that the world had ever seen.
The B-29 was, I guess you would call it the Cadillac of the bomber fleet. It was so much more advanced than the B-17 or the B-24 or any of the other smaller bombers, obviously. You could fly the thing at 35,000 feet, fully pressurized in shirt sleeves, because you know, on the B-17s and B-24s, you had to wear the sheepskin lined bombers, flying clothes, and you had to wear the blue bunny suit, which is the electrically heated flying suit. You didn't have to do that in the B-29. So from an operational standpoint, it was an easier airplane to operate, more user-friendly is what we would say today, more ergonomic, as we would say today, compared to some of the older airplanes. But at the end of the day, it was still flying in the combat, and just a little 16th-inch piece of skin was all metal, is all that protecting you from the enemy.
As advanced as this bomber was, however, it would still have its challenges. With engine problems, anti-aircraft, and skilled Japanese fighter pilots still in the air, the missions would not be easy. The crews that would fill these superfortresses would have to take on the challenge of flying hours over the Pacific Ocean, right into the backyard of an enemy that was hell-bent on killing them. Thankfully, however, many brave Americans would rise to the task. And one of these young men would be a boy by the name of Manny Greer. But, as we will see later, playing an important role in the story, his last name was not always Greer. Originally, it was actually Manuel Greenberg, a Jewish name.
Being Jewish, I had more of a feeling about the Germans. About the Japanese,
Raised in a Jewish family, Manny had strong ties to the war that had been raging across the globe. Although he undoubtedly wanted to fight against the Nazis, the war in Europe was not where he would be assigned. Instead, he would ship out to the Pacific, fighting against the Japanese. Joining the Air Force in 1944, Manny found himself sent to where the Army needed new recruits the most, for crews of the new B-29. And specifically, Manny would find himself appointed to the role of bombardier, the crew member that was responsible for looking through the bombsight and releasing the aircraft's 20,000-pound payload of bombs onto the specified target. After his training and a long plane ride across the Pacific, a young Manny would find himself in Saipan in the summer, ready to take part in his very first mission. But during this time, these were not the normal bombing raids that had taken place throughout the rest of the war. Instead of strategic raids targeting military objectives, these raids were large-scale bombing of Japanese cities. But there was a strategy behind this tactic.
The firebombing in Japan, people look back at that and back at those days, and they say that the atomic bomb was the most horrible thing that the U.S. military ever did. Well, we killed far more people with the Tokyo fire raids than we ever did the atomic bombs. And I don't know that I would want to be involved in either on the ground, but the Tokyo fire raids probably were the most terrifying things that were ever done from the air. I think they would have had to have been. The whole reason they did them was precision daylight bombing, like we did over in Europe with the B-17s and B-24s. You go to 30,000 feet, your Norden bombsight, drop the bomb in the pickle barrel, as they used to say. It was easy, comparatively easy to hit like a railroad yard. In Japan, they didn't build airplanes in factories all the time. They built parts for the airplanes in people's houses, in neighborhoods, in warehouses in the middle of town, and behind these these rice screen house walls that they have. And so the manufacturing capability was spread out all over the town instead of just being in the industrial area. So the jet stream over in that part of the world was much more powerful than anyone really ever thought of, and they weren't getting the results they wanted as far as accuracy with the high altitude bombing like we did, pinpoint precision bombing like we did in Europe. So General LeMay, Curtis LeMay, who was a commander of the 20th Air Force, he said, we're going to go down low and we're going to use incendiary bombs and napalm, and we're going to burn the Japanese out. We're going to burn their industry out, and we do that by destroying their cities. And he said himself that had we lost the war, he would have been considered a war criminal. And I don't think he was by any stretch, but they knew at the time that they were, you couldn't discern between civilians and military workers at that point. And so they literally come down, 7,500, 11,000 feet with no defensive weapons on the B-29. They left the turrets on, but they took the guns off of them. Or sometimes they didn't even carry ammo in them except for the tail guns so that they could add more weight in bombs and gas. And they would come over between 7,500 and 11,000 feet and just carpet bomb the place. And the other B-29s coming behind them said 800-900 miles away, they could see the glow of the flames from Tokyo burning. And we killed more people in one night with the Tokyo fire raids than we did with the atomic bomb. Both atomic bombs together. We probably also did more to end Japan's manufacturing capability, because literally we burned their factories to the ground. And it would be a horrible way to die, but simple fact is, if they'd have surrendered, they wouldn't have had to do that. But even the fire raids, as tragic as they were, that wasn't enough to convince them to surrender. And so you had to go to the atomic bomb, which in theory is more horrible, but on paper, just number-wise, it's no more horrible than the fire bombs were.
While this was no doubt brutal, most historians agree that it was a necessary path. But that does not mean that it was easy for the men that had to carry it out. On his very first mission, Manny Greer would find this out. Now, in the process of preparing for this video, I have done a great deal of research, and I have not been able to definitively identify exactly when or where Manny's first mission took place. But what I do know is that he did fly on a B-29 by the name of Wimpy's Blitzburger. This would be named after his pilot, Major Neil Wimple. In the late summer of 1945, Major Wimple would lead Manny and the rest of their crew in a bombing raid that was destined to strike one of the many industrial cities of Japan. And by now, in the nighttime bombing raids, many of the flights were actually taking off individually, without formation, simply flying on solo runs to drop their bomb loads on their own, one after another. As their B-29 approached Japan, Manny Greer got ready in his position as the bombardier. He took to the bomb site, and fairly soon, the coast of Japan came into view. The bomb bay doors opened on their B-29, and everything was now on him. But as the Japanese city came into view beneath him, something happened.
There were no lights down there. But before you got into your plane in the Mariana Islands, you had maps of the city or where you were going to bomb. So you knew where the city would start, where it would end. Well, the first flight, first bombing mission, it was a night, I took pity on these people. And I dropped my bombs after the town, not on the town.
Now, this creates a perplexing question. Obviously, Manny had orders to follow, and this was his job. But at the same time, on a personal level, one can understand how such an action might be difficult. In fact, Manny makes it clear that being Jewish, things would have been very different had he been dropping bombs over Europe instead of Japan.
There was no reason. I just took pity on these people. Now, if it were Germany, I wouldn't have had that feeling at all. But the Japanese people, it was not the same thing. That was a feeling. Now, a lot of these things, there is no reason. It's just feeling.
Manny made his decision in this mission and released their payload late of the target, dropping his bombs in the fields beyond the city. It is likely that this choice could have saved the lives of Japanese men, women, and children on the ground. But at the same time, Manny's crew, like all of the other B-29s in the air, were risking their lives to strike these targets and fulfill their objective. Thus, it meant that these risks could have been taken on for nothing, since the objective itself was not being completed. It is a perplexing decision, and one that, as an 18 or 19-year-old boy, no one should have to face. But Manny did, and according to him, it was a decision that simply happened in the moment. There is no doubt that in World War II, this bombing campaign would be one of the most horrendous parts of the entire war. In particular, though, the bombing of Japan was viewed as a necessary step to prevent the ground invasion of Japan, which, according to most estimates, would have cost over 1 million lives from both sides and at least another year of war. Manny did not tell any of his fellow crew members about this, and following this mission, Manny did follow orders and drop the bombs on the target as directed. And while we cannot put ourselves in Manny's shoes at this particular moment, we can arrive at the certain conclusion that war is hell and should be avoided at all cost, so that no man ever has to make a choice like this again. Comment your thoughts on Manny's difficult decision and what you think about the bombing of Tokyo in World War II. If you know a living veteran of the air war, fill out the form below so that we can tell their story. And thanks to the Commemorative Air Force for their commentary in this video.